Hey guys, it's Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds by nerds, hanging out with a couple nerds. We have Nate the Nerdarch and special guest Steve Kenson, which I'm very excited to have on the show today. The man has literally worked on nearly everything, I think, in RPGs. I was just totally blown away. Like I was telling you before, I recognize you and know you from Mutants and Masterminds. And then I started digging a little deeper before having you on the show, and I'm like, oh my god, he literally has worked on everything.
Yeah.
So, so I want to start off with a kind of a big question. You've worked on some Marvel properties, I believe,
Yep.
and I absolutely know you worked on DC properties, and you're a huge superhero fan, especially RPGs. Where the hell do you go now?
Right? Yeah, I mean, I've been really fortunate in that, I've got to work on and with some really great properties. In a lot of regards, that's actually the question I've been asking myself recently, because Green Ronin is in the process of, we're finishing up a new edition of Freedom City for Mutants and Masterminds for the 3rd edition of the game. And that should be out in the summer. We're just finishing up on layout and art for that. It's going to be a really nice looking book. But when the new edition of Freedom City is done, we're kind of going to have a bit of a capstone on the Earth Prime setting, because we're going to have 4 pretty substantial books, Freedom City and Emerald City and Atlas of Earth Prime, and material from Cosmic Handbook to kind of round out the whole Earth Prime setting. So we're kind of talking at Green Ronin about what's next as far as that goes, and thinking about the notion of whether or not it's worth exploring another setting or another style of superhero game, or something else with Mutants and Masterminds. We've used the system for DC Adventures and for the licensed wildcards setting. So we're thinking about some other possibilities, because we've really detailed the Earth Prime setting in pretty serious depth at this point.
That does bring me to the question. I know you guys did the Wildcards series for 2nd edition.
Mm-hmm.
Did that get updated to 3rd?
No, hasn't been yet. We did do some 3rd edition compatible wildcard stuff in electronic format for the new series of books that started a few years back. But we never updated the original source book to 3rd edition. Now, with wildcards having all kinds of new books coming out for it, maybe that's a potential opportunity to look at. We already have a working relationship with George Martin from Song of Ice and Fire Roleplaying, and our previous licensing with wildcards. So you never know.
I don't even think he writes anymore. He just licenses. He's like, I'm done. Yeah, the Wildcard series, they're up to like 23, 24 books, something like that. I mean, they're up there.
Quite a few.
Yeah, this stuff comes out so infrequent. It's hard for me to keep up with it. Like, I'll forget about it, and then I'll see it all of a sudden. Like, oh, how did I miss this one?
Yeah. The new series of books I'm going to say they have like 5 or 6 out at this point at least. And they've been good. I've been enjoying them.
Which ones are those? I'm trying to figure out if they're the ones I've read or not.
Oh gosh, and I'm trying to remember all of the titles off the top of my head.
There was there was the one that started off as a reality show, and then next thing you know, they're UN peacekeepers.
That's the new series, basically.
Okay.
Started with American Ace, and kind of went from there.
Yeah, I love that stuff. Yeah, also, like, you got Icons is another superhero game that basically that was all you though, right? Or did that later get folded in the Green Ronin?
No, Icons was originally sort of a pet project of mine. My friend Chris Pramus, who's the president of Green Ronin, likes to joke that I have a superhero game design problem, and that given the opportunity, I'll just design more superhero games all day long. But I had a couple of different game things I wanted to play around with in designing Icons, did it as sort of a side project. Published an initial edition with Adamant Entertainment. Then eventually I took the rights back and did a new, what I refer to as the assembled edition of it, that I did all of the production side stuff, and Green Ronin distributed the core book for it.
Okay, I knew I saw some kind of connection. I saw it move around.
Yeah.
I'm not losing my mind.
But,
awesome.
But technically speaking, Icons is all me.
So what are the differences between Icons and Mutants and Masterminds? Why would one appeal to someone over the other game?
Well, Icons was designed to be much more of a simple, fast sort of pickup game. I was primarily interested in random character creation as sort of the gateway to doing Icons. I cut my teeth on superhero games doing villains, the original editions of Villains and Vigilantes, and then playing a lot of Marvel superheroes in high school. And so, I was very used to the notion of randomly rolled up superhero characters. I got away from that, design-wise, and obviously Mutants and Masterminds is a point build system. It's much more about crafting exactly the kind of character you want. But the problem with point build superhero systems is they tend to be very front loaded in terms of the amount of work that has to go into them as far as character design. And so I wanted to do a system that was just, you grab a handful of dice, you can roll up a character within, 15 minutes, and get playing pretty much right away. And when I was playtesting Icons at conventions and things like that, that was one of the elements of the system that people really enjoyed, was rolling up these weird off-the-wall characters and getting these combinations of powers, and then they'd have to build a superhero character to explain it all. That would be like, well, how does this set of powers make sense, in conjunction with this origin that I've rolled up and all of that. And I had a lot of players say, wow, the really cool thing about this is I would have, if I had sat down cold at the table and you'd said, make up a superhero character, I would have never come up with this guy. But the fact that I was given, through this set of roles, this set of powers to work with, I came up with something that was really cool. And so that's one of the sort of key conceits of Icons as a game, is you sit down with a bunch of tables, you roll up a bunch of superheroes, and you're pretty much ready to play, right off the bat. It's great for groups that just want to play a pickup game, for convention games. It's great for working with kids. If you just want to be able to roll up superheroes and play a game and not have to go through a whole process of designing and explaining how to design characters. And the game system itself plays, fairly fast and easy. It's 6-sided dice and relatively small numbers. So it's not as math intensive as other games can be. Mutants and Masterminds has the advantage of being a much more traditional D20 based game. Its core system is familiar to a lot of gamers, and its character creation system has a lot more detail to it that allows you to kind of build anything that you want as far as that goes. And it's a much more sort of high resolution character creation system in terms of how it describes your characters, whereas Icons is a lot less detail. You're going to have 6 abilities, maybe a handful of specialties, and a small handful of powers that you've come up with randomly, and that's it.
I feel like this generation of gamers, they're kind of spoiled, but they're kind of spoiled, and at the same time they kind of missed out on the 80s where everything was random. Like you hardly ever picked anything. You just grab some dice and then you're going to figure out your character. Mm-hmm. Where I guess towards the 90s we started getting more to, well, how about we make what you want to play?
Yep.
and it's kind of, you know, and the trend has kind of stayed with that. But every now and again, there's some pushback for, you know, for the randomness of the 80s. Like I always kind of like offhandedly and jokingly say, you know, the merit of a game, a role playing game in the 80s was how many tables and charts it had.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's sort of a happy medium, you know, as far as that sort of thing. I mean, because when I first started getting into gaming, that was my thing. Was I didn't even have anyone to play RPGs with initially. I just had games, and I was just rolling up characters like all the time, and I would just like have a notebook of characters that I was just randomly rolling for games like Gamma World and even D&D. Where it would just be like, you know, I'd just be like dice and tables, rolling up characters and making up, you know, stories about them and things like that. And I think that element of RPGs as sort of a springboard for people's imaginations, you know, is kind of coming back, you know, into popularity. You know, the 5th edition D&D, you know, has a lot more random tables to it in terms of providing you ways to get your imagination going, to kind of give you some ideas to work with.
The yeah, everything that old is new. Oh, everything that's old is new again.
Yeah.
So we have a couple questions coming in, comments. One from Tom Rowe. I always think of Danny Phantom and Saturday Morning Superheroes when I think of icons. I think, yeah, the art probably definitely captures that.
Yep.
Art Wood. Are you guys going to convert any of your older products like M&M to D&D 5e style? Well, part of that I can answer because 2nd edition, you guys did almost every genre, and there was definitely a fantasy source book that was very sword and sorcery and Conan style.
Yep. Yeah, we did a source book called Warriors and Warlocks in the 2nd edition of Mutants and Masterminds. That was basically sort of on the whole sword and sorcery comic book genre. And it was fairly popular at the time. So, I mean, it's certainly something we've talked about potentially doing more with.
Yeah, I mean, I was telling you off camera, we actually ran a fantasy-based game using 2nd edition's Mutants and Masterminds, and that was the source book we delved into a lot. Vex Bad Spider, what do you think of indie RPGs?
I love indie RPGs. I think they're a great source of ideas. They're a terrific, you know, place to find, you know, just new and interesting ways of doing things. And a lot of them are, you know, really great games in their own right, as far as that goes. I mean, I think that, you know, the funny thing is that when you talk about RPGs, basically almost the entire industry is a cottage indie business anyway. I mean, short of a couple of really substantial publishers, you know, there really isn't anything that isn't indie in the RPG business. You know, I mean, it's such a small industry.
You would probably know better than me, but there's literally dozens of companies, but there's only about 4 or 5 that you can say, and people will actually, most people will know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, it's very, you know, you get niche within the niche. And the other thing I was going to say, Vex, if you go to the description, I actually have a list of everything that Steve has worked on. So that'll also give you an idea of how he feels about indie RPGs as well, I believe.
Yeah. Yeah.
We got Professor Bill from Comic Book University just wants to let you know he thinks you're awesome.
Thank you.
Which I concur. Pocket 3 Par. Any plans to work on any more Shadowrun novels?
Not at the moment, but you know, if the opportunity arises and I end up talking to Catalyst about it, maybe. I kind of, you know, told the stories that I wanted to with the Shadowrun books that I did, but I love the Shadowrun setting. and it's a great place to tell stories in. So maybe some point.
Okay, so I have a clarification to a previous question. So what Art wants to know is if you have any plans or desires to work on any 5e stuff. So I actually have an answer for you on part of that, at least. Steve already has.
Right.
Out of the Abyss and Sword Coast Adventures Guide.
Adventurer's Guide, yeah, indeed. Yeah, I was the lead designer on both of those books. So I already have done some 5e work. I love 5e. I think it's a great addition for Dungeons & Dragons. I think that the Wizards design team did a terrific job with it. It's a fun game to write for and design for. And I'm actually running a 5e game for my game group. I just started running Horde of the Dragon Queen for them, and so it's a fun game to play and run too. I'd love to do more with it at some point. A lot of it is just a matter of time, really.
I have a personal question for you. So why Horde of the Dragon Queen opposed to, say, Homebrew?
Well, frankly, I thought about the notion of designing a campaign to run it, but it was a combination of the fact that there was a good campaign that already existed, and I had already run Out of the Abyss when we were designing it. I ran playtest games with my home gaming group. And for me, that was kind of sort of the homebrew experience, because we were running the game pretty much as we were designing it in many regards. I just didn't want to design a whole other D&D campaign for my group, basically, at this point. So I was lazy.
I have this weird thing where I actually feel like it's easier for me to just do my own thing than it is to follow pre-written adventure, because I feel like I have to read the whole pre-written adventure, and I feel like that takes me longer and more time than it would for me to just write something new.
Sure. Yeah, I hear that. I mean, and I can't, like most dungeon masters, I think I can't use a pre-written adventure without changing it anyway. I mean, I keep like revising bits and pieces along the way, and no plan survives contact with a group of players anyway. So there's always sort of on the fly revisions that have to happen while you're game mastering and running a campaign.
We have a question from
go ahead.
From a Native War Mask. What advice would you give to other creators?
Oh gosh, that's a big topic.
The short version, if you want.
Yeah. I guess I guess to me it's do the stuff that you're excited about, really. I think that the key thing when you're creating for games, whether it's your home game or whether you're creating for publication, is to build the kind of things that you want out of a game, rather than trying to please what you think an audience wants. My favorite game projects have always been the stuff that have been designs and products that I always wanted, essentially. Those, I think that kind of enthusiasm shows in people's work, as opposed to stuff that is just intended to cater to what they think an audience wants.
Makes sense. Go where you're passionate.
Yeah, definitely. Go where your passion lies as far as design.
So I know this is reaching back into the past at this point, but like, do you have what is your like favorite moment from working on DC Universe, like any of the DC books?
Gosh, there was so much, but some of my favorite things. We got one of the best things about working with DC, but also one of the most challenging things in some regards, was basically access to DC's art archive. Part of the license was, you get to use DC's art, in your book. And DC basically said, here's the parameters of our art archive. Anything that we've ever scanned, essentially, that is, available electronically, we have in an archive, and, we can pull it for you and you can use it. That notion was both exciting and kind of overwhelming, because there was a lot of like, okay, so basically anything you guys have published like in the last 30 years, and so for the DC Adventures books, we ended up sort of crowdsourcing some of our art direction for the books, because we were like, wow, we've got to like fill out, art for, hundreds and hundreds of characters and the like. And so we ended up turning to our fan community and saying, hey, we basically have to come up with art for all of these things. How about you guys, give us your favorite, illustrations, that DC has published for this bunch of characters. We give people a whole list of characters and we say, find us your favorite, illustration for these guys. And we get tons and tons of great suggestions, where we were able to track down pieces of art that we wouldn't have, that would have taken us way too many, work hours as a small design team to actually effectively do. And it really gave us a great variety of art in the book and allowed us to find some really great pieces. It was terrific. It was a fun way of handling it. And I think the fans really enjoyed being involved in that part of the process and poring over their comic collections and coming up with suggestions and, oh, you guys should totally use this panel, sort of a thing. So that was a lot of fun. I got to, in the DC Universe book, I got to write a short, comprehensive history of the DC Universe, which was fun. I enjoyed doing that. So,
I'm sure that was easy.
Yeah, because there was very little to cover, so it was totally easy to condense it down to like 10 pages. So yeah, it was a challenge, but it was a lot of fun to do.
I actually remember, because you guys actually have one of the best RPG communities over at the Atomic Think Tank. I remember when you guys were asking for the submissions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've never been so excited. The only way I could be more excited about you guys getting a hold of property if it was Marvel, but
yeah,
I don't see that coming anytime soon. But that would be awesome.
Yeah,
to have both DC and Marvel under the same rule system.
Yeah, the closest we've come is the huge amount of strictly unofficial content that folks have done on the forums, which is pretty substantial.
Yeah, those guys are prolific over there. I haven't hung out there in quite some time, but when I was playing more Mutants and Masterminds, I was over there all the time. Just
a great resource.
Just don't mind me. I'm kind of like paying attention to you and trying to follow the chat at the same time.
Sure thing. Sure thing.
But
they're just having their own conversation.
Yeah. Fantasy Age is another one that I haven't yet got to explore, but that I want to. There's just so many games.
Yeah, so many games, so little time. I hear that.
What would you say the selling point is on? You worked on that one, right?
Fantasy Age is primarily, I did some work on Fantasy Age. Fantasy Age's design is primarily Chris Pramus's work. He did the primary design for the system for Dragon Age when we licensed it from BioWare. And then we basically built the Fantasy Age basic rulebook on the core system that was done for Dragon Age. But done as a standalone fantasy system without the Thetis setting. Fantasy Age combines sort of a lot of classic RPG structure in terms of a fantasy class and level based system with a really fun in-play mechanic that basically the action resolution is 3d6 based. But for most actions, you're rolling 2 matching dice and 1 differentiated die. And if any 2 out of the 3 dice roll matching numbers, then the number that shows on what we refer to as the stunt die, the differentiated die, is a number of stunt points that the player gets for that action. And there are basically all sorts of different ways that players can spend stunt points. It's kind of like an expanded critical hit system, but it applies to all kinds of actions, and it has a whole range of different effects. So it adds a whole lot of randomness and variety to things like combat that can get kind of, hammer and tongs back and forth of I rolled a hit and you rolled a hit and then he rolls to hit and then I rolled a hit. And instead, the stunt system mixes it up a little bit, and somebody could come up with stunt points at any point. And the heroes can do it, the villains can do it, and stunts can range all over the place, from moving people around the battlefield to extra damage to overcoming armor to disarming somebody, and all kinds of other things that add a lot of variety to the action of the game. And in Fantasy Age, we've expanded stunts to include all kinds of challenge, non-combat scenes, and even role-playing scenes for character interaction. So there's a lot of interesting gameplay. The gameplay is still very fast and very easy, and the core resolution system is very simple, but stunts add a lot of variety without adding a lot of extra weight to the rules.
So it sounds a lot more cinematic than, say, like a D&D game.
Yeah, very much aimed at sort of fast cinematic gameplay.
We have staff writer Scott Garibay. Woot, Steve Kenson, huge fan of the Saga card rule set for Dragonlance and Marvel.
Oh, yeah, me too. Me too.
He's reaching back a little ways for that one, I think.
Yeah, that was a great system. I was such a fan of Saga back in the day that I think that I was pretty much the most prolific freelance writer for Dragon Magazine on Saga articles. Dragon's editors must have gotten so tired of getting Saga article submissions from me, because I was
I doubt they ever got tired.
Can I write another Saga article? They'd be like, yes, you can write another Saga article. So yeah, I played a lot of that game, and I was a big fan.
Nice. So we do a roll call here at some point or another, and they're starting to weigh in. We got Kyle in Jersey, Vex Bad Spider in Utah, Hawkeye 277 Boston. We got Scott Garibay in Wilmington. We got Uncle Peter in Toronto. Anthony out of California. We got Chad, only gamer in the South. I doubt that somehow. We got Curtis in Edmonton. We got Stepchild of the Sun, Baltimore. Curtis, that's you again. Lane, we got in Phoenix. We got some more Phoenix, Oklahoma, Washington State. GCU, I'm not sure where that's at. Atlantis, I doubt that one. Comic Book University. Oh no, we don't have it. There's Washington State, Grand Canyon University, Pittsburgh, Washington, Beijing. That's a new one. I don't think we've seen Beijing before.
Cool. Well, I appreciate everybody tuning in.
It's one of the fun. It's one of the highlights for me. I always like seeing where people are from.
Yeah.
Washington, Illinois, Atlanta. Where's Sweden at? Serbia. We usually get a couple like Scandinavian countries, and I don't know what time it is over there. But, we got Waterdeep weighing in. Italy. All around the world. It's one of the cool things about the internet.
Yeah.
So What are you working on nowadays? What can people expect from you in the near future?
So right now it's working on. We're just finishing up the third edition of Freedom City for Mutants and Masterminds. That's in layout and production right now. Finishing up on art, and that's planned for an early summer release. So I'm really looking forward to having that out there. Freedom City is still a near and dear to my heart setting. And then beyond that, I'm working on design for a new introductory book for Mutants and Masterminds. We want to do, now that we've got the deluxe Heroes Handbook out as sort of the standard core rule book for the game, we want to do a basically sort of basic rule book that will introduce folks to the game. That's a little more simple, easy to digest, easy to introduce new players to. As far as that goes. So I'm working on design for that. And I'm still working on some age system stuff, as we've got plenty of plans for that going forward. And I just finished up design and development work on Blue Rose Romantic Fantasy for Age. We're shipping the core book for that now after a successful Kickstarter, and we've got a narrator's kit and an adventure set, an anthology of 6 adventures that's moved into production now. So that's coming soon. So that's pretty much, and I've got a couple of irons in the fire. Nothing too major. Icons is sort of a side project for me. I work on it when I can. But I have some design stuff I'm working on, as well as revising an older adventure. We just came out with a big combined adventure book called Rise of the Phalanx that Icons artist Dan Hauser wrote as a series, and we compiled into one big 200-page adventure campaign for Icons. So it's sort of Icons' first big adventure path kind of book. Yeah, that's pretty much what's going on right now. Oh, and I'm doing a stretch goal for Rodney Thompson's Dusk City Outlaws thing coming up, which I'm looking forward to. That's actually getting a chance to do a cyberpunk thing again, which is fun.
Oh, cool. I don't think I remember seeing too many superhero campaign, big campaign adventures.
Really
Not since Marvel.
No. Yeah, there really aren't very many. Superhero games don't generally, or haven't generally, gone in for campaigns per se. Usually superhero games either do standalone adventures or they do big setting source books. And that's about the size of it. One of the big things I've tended to focus on with Icons since I started it was publishing primarily adventures for it. Because I really felt like there weren't a lot of superhero games that were focused on doing just adventures.
I mean, that's a good play too, because I feel like that genre is a little more difficult for some GMs, especially if you're used to playing fantasy or a D&D type game. Now,
Yeah.
I personally, I love the running Mutants and Masterminds because I would pull out all kinds of weird stuff. Like I turned Mr. T in my world into like our version of the Incredible Hulk, and
Nice.
I had Michael Jackson's chimpanzee Bubbles get turned into basically King Kong and reenact the Empire State Building scene, carrying somebody with them. And if it had continued, I was going to probably make Michael Jackson a zombie lord, and this is going back quite a few years. I was going to have Trump be a symbiote with his hair being the symbiote alien. So I love like being able to stuff all the pop culture references into a superheroes game. It's a lot of fun. Tom had asked a while back in the chat, what non-RPG influences what hobbies are you into that influence your RPG design?
That's an interesting question. Well, I read a lot. I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy naturally, and a fair amount of, a modest amount of history and science and biography and those kinds of things. And a lot of that stuff finds its way into my game writing. I tend to be a fairly, I research stuff, when I'm writing about it. And so that tends to sometimes lead down rabbit holes when you start getting into researching things like organized crime. When I was writing a book on organized crime for Shadowrun, I ended up doing a lot of research on real world organized crime organizations and syndicates, and reading books by journalists who had infiltrated the Russian mafia, and all kinds of stuff like that, to find out how syndicates worked. There's a running joke that most writers' Google search histories probably have us flagged in an FBI database somewhere, because they make us sound like notorious criminals for the amount of things the ways we look into ways to either commit crimes or get away with murder. So I do tend to do a fair amount of sort of research work. I'm very into into ancient mythology and modern occultism, so I read a lot of stuff about those things. And of course, I'm a giant comic book nerd, who's been reading comic books since he was 10. So, a lot of that stuff obviously tends to find its way one way or another into things that I'm working on.
Yeah, I was gonna go out on a limb with the comic book nerd part. Otherwise, it'd be really weird for all the superhero stuff you put out.
Right. No, I was a comic book nerd actually before I was a gaming nerd.
Well, I actually got into comic books from the Marvel's RPG superhero game.
Really, that's cool.
And these guys are probably gonna get bored now, because the first book that I started reading was Alpha Flight.
Yeah.
And people that are into comic books go, "How is that your first book you ever read? It doesn't make sense."
But is it because of the Alpha Flight adventure for Marvel?
No, it's because we were playing the heroes from the Marvel universe, and my friends had already taken Silver Surfer, the Hulk, and Thor, and I'm like, what is left that's going to compete with that? And
right.
And in one of the books I found Box,
and
Sasquatch.
Sasquatch, yeah.
And I went with Roger Bosch's Box, which is actually much inferior to the Jeffries Madison's box.
Right.
Box. But so that got me intrigued. Went to the comic book store, and then what I also found out too by doing that was, like, Alpha Flight had the first like main hero to actually die in a book and kind of stay dead.
Yep.
I mean, they brought him back eventually, but it took like a decade.
Yeah. I mean, one of the great things about Alpha Flight as a title was that it was in many ways, it was such a secondary title for the Marvel Universe, that the writer could pretty much get away with whatever he wanted. As far as, I mean, John Byrne proved that pretty much from the start, when he was like, "Yeah, I'm just going to kill off Guardian," and because the book was sort of so tangential to the mainstream Marvel universe. The writers of Alpha Flight could do pretty much whatever they wanted, and usually did.
They did so many things for the first time, and people probably don't even realize it. Like, first one of the very first gay superheroes.
Yep.
Then they gave them AIDS later on. They had gender swapping that happened in there. Like, there was so much that happened. And they would always get the best writers and artists when they would first come in. They're like, "Oh, here's this book. Try this," right? Yeah. And they do this amazing job, and then they would send them to one of the main books. It broke my heart every time.
Yep.
So that was my entry, and then for years after that, I started reading comic books until I just couldn't afford it anymore, because I was just too many titles. I'm like, oh my God, I'm spending $30-$40 a week on comic books.
Yeah, I hear that. I've been a big fan of Marvel Unlimited, for the last couple of years.
Yeah, I enjoyed Marvel Unlimited. I think I started with Ghost Rider, which is kind of a strange thing to start with. Not, no Spider-Man, no X-Men, no any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like someone gave me a Ghost Rider comic for some reason, and I was like, "Oh, I like this guy."
Right?
Yeah, my favorites were like Alpha Flight, Moonlight, Moon Knight, Daredevil. So some of the outliers, even like the DC stuff that I read, Demon
Mm-hmm.
and Deathstroke the Terminator. Like that was it from DC.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I was always very, even from the beginning of reading comics, very evenly split in terms of reading DC and Marvel. And I had books that I liked from both, and would like occasionally, I mean, like over the years, wax and wane with one or the other, but I always read both.
I was just looking at the chat that they're going off on Alpha Flight still.
Alpha Flight is a wacky book. It really was.
I really enjoyed it. They just had the weirdest superheroes.
Yeah.
Which made it but it made it the best.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, surprisingly long-lived too. I want to say it went for like 120 something issues or something like that.
They did like a miniseries relaunch. Not that long back, and so now, in order to sate myself when it comes to comic books, every once in a while I'll just pick up like a stack of graphic novels.
Yeah.
The only problem is I have no idea what's going on when I do that. And I'm like, Avengers versus X-Men. What is this crap? I don't even know what's going on.
Yeah.
I definitely feel like an old guy. Get off my lawn. But yeah, so
those are definitely the challenges of comic book continuity these days.
Also, you must be loving all the movies now.
Oh yeah, I mean, we live in a golden age of superhero nerdity, pretty much everywhere. I mean, it's TV and movies and, all over the place. So yeah, no, I mean, Marvel Studios is doing, keeps doing great movies. There's, TV series. I mean, I can watch a superhero show pretty much every night of the week if I want to.
Yeah, like the DC stuff, like the movies. I wish they would take some notes from Marvel or from their animated department,
right?
Or
even from their TV department, because the DC TV series are pretty good. But
yeah, it makes zero sense. Like they can't do a movie to save their lives.
Yeah,
but the TV stuff is so good, and so is the animated stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and even DC's just animated, like direct-to-video films have been pretty good, but yeah, I don't know.
They're breaking my balls now. They say I'm Puck. Puck was actually he was probably one of my favorite characters from that whole series. He was the best. Yeah,
no, Puck was a lot of fun.
What do you think of the Netflix stuff? Do you have any favorites there?
Yeah, it's good. I've been enjoying all the Marvel Netflix stuff. I think that my favorite is still probably Jessica Jones, but that was just such a tour de force in terms of the writing and the acting and the storytelling, that it's hard to match. But I'm enjoying all of the Marvel Netflix series. They're all pretty fun.
Now, Jessica Jones was my least favorite, but at the same time, I acknowledge like the skill that went into that writing. It was so much more of a psychological thriller type.
Well, it is. It's in some ways it's the least superhero-y of all of them, but and the funny thing is that I wasn't really a big fan of Jessica Jones, the character, in the comics, but the show was just so well done. It was just really gripping.
Yeah, the whole thing. I can't wait for Defenders. I know even in the chat, Iron Fist is getting some hate, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, Iron Fist is problematic.
So, you got any questions, Nate? You've been quiet over there.
No, a lot of stuff's been answered, and I'm pretty good just listening for this.
I think someone just asked Scott to ask Steve to weigh in on a D&D movie, just because he always asks everyone that.
Oh, poor D&D movies. Yeah, I really would love to see a really good D&D movie.
I think we all would. On the plus side, because of the ones they've put out previously, like our expectations are so low. So if they do it moderately well, we'll be like, oh my God, it's amazing.
That's true. Well, and the funny thing is, it's not as though Wizards is lacking in really good stories that could be turned into movies, or TV series or whatever. And I understand the desire to license Dungeons and Dragons itself, as a thing, but some of the stories that have been written for the worlds of Dungeons and Dragons would make really good, stories, in and of themselves. And I don't understand why that hasn't been happening apart from the challenges of working with Hollywood in general.
So, all right. So we have a question from Vex, also on the whole, Dungeons and Dragons movie thing.
Mm-hmm.
Me personally, they suffer from the DC problems. Like, you got all these great stories, just use one. Right. Instead of basically what you said with the licensing. But it's like, this isn't complicated. Just use one of these bestsellers you have,
and hook us a little better than the average GM on a Saturday night can.
Right. Yeah. Right.
There's thousands and thousands of hundreds of thousands probably of people who have written a story or talked through a story or repeat a story. You got to do better than them, or you're not gonna. It's not gonna make it.
So Vex wants to know. I don't know if you're a video gamer or not, but what you think of City of Heroes.
Curiously enough, I am not much of a video gamer. I think that the inherent limitations of video games just don't really hit my area of interest, because the two things that I like most about RPGs are the creative aspect of it, and just being able to make up stuff, and the sort of unexpected qualities of it. I really like the way things happen in gameplay that come out of left field, and again, kind of force you to be creative. I think that the popular technical term for it would be referred to as emergent play. But those things really are kind of not found in most video games. I mean, although their sophistication has increased tremendously, and there are a lot more sort of branching story paths and things like that, you're still very limited in terms of what your choices are, and there's not much that creative about it. It's fun in its own right, but it doesn't really appeal much to me. So I'm not a giant fan of video games for the most part. I'm passingly familiar with City of Heroes, primarily because of the superhero stuff. And there was a point where the City of Heroes was looking for a tabletop license, and I was taking a closer look at it for that. And it looks like a really fun world. I like a lot of the characters and things from it, and I could see the appeal of it as a just sort of a hero generator of being able to play with making costumes and characters and things like that out of it.
Yeah, I had about 20 characters, and most of them were level 1.
Right.
Because I wrote their backstory, I designed them, I gave them their powers. I'm like, all right,
done.
Time to play my major character, and that's it.
Yeah.
I had like one super high level character, one like medium level character, and the rest were all level 1s with just cool designs and stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to stay away from video games myself. I dabbled with that one a little bit, but yeah, if I start getting into video games, the next thing I know, my wife is remarried, my kids are calling someone else dad, and I don't know who anybody is anymore. I just end up plugged into the machine.
Yeah.
Just not enough hours in the day. So Scott Garby, one of our staff writers, has a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think the best rule designer in the business is right now? Best story person, best artist, etc.
Softball
Softball question for you.
Yeah, right. There, yeah, gosh, there are a lot of good designers out there, to be sure. Who's the, gosh, I don't know who I'd say the best is currently. That's tough. There are a lot of designers whose work I like, and a lot of good guys who are doing some really cool stuff. I'm a big fan of, and this is cheating a little bit, but I'm a big fan of Greg Gordon's design. Greg is not currently in the industry, but Greg did a lot of really great design for, he did the original DC Heroes game, the primary game design on Torg, did work for Earthdawn for FASA, and I just really admire the mathematical elegance of Greg's designs. He really builds a system that has a lot of great underlying structure to it, that has a lot of flexibility, that can do a lot of things. And I took a lot of lessons from playing and reading his games over the years. And yeah, you know, I gotta say, like I said, I admire the work of a lot of folks who are working in design these days. My friend Rob Schwal was also a terrific designer. He did work on 5th edition, now has his own game line out called Shadow of the Demon Lord. And Rob is like the hardest working man in gaming as far as that goes. He's incredibly prolific. And really has a great eye for design. Another guy who really knows how to get down into the sort of nitty gritty of the numbers and the structure of a game and really make it work in a way that it is you really have to kind of take it apart again to appreciate it.
Now that's saying a lot when you say someone's prolific.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. Rob he kickstarted Shadows of the Demon Lord less than 2 years ago. I was going to say it might be more than a year ago now. There are over 100 products out for it. And some of them are short, but still, it is one of the most robust fantasy game lines ever, really, and has only been around for a relatively short amount of time. So Rob is crazy prolific. I wish I had his ability to crank out words, but not his macro obsession with it. So it's a fair trade-off. So
when I wasn't kidding when I said that was a softball question from Scott, because he did ask Matt Colville who he thought was Gary Gygax's spiritual successor.
Wow. Yeah.
Which actually Matt had some great answers for that, but I just found it funny.
Yeah, Nerdarchy Ryan has a question. What projects are on your wish list to work on?
Oh gosh, like I said, I've been really fortunate in that I've gotten to do a lot of my wish list projects over the years.
So you've got a lot of things checked off.
Yeah, I've checked off a lot of those boxes. So, kind of my wish list projects now are more in the form of wishing I had a little bit more time to noodle around with just weird little designs for games and settings that I want to do. The challenging part of doing this professionally is obviously you go where the money is to a certain degree, and you work like I said, you try to go with the things you're passionate about in design, but it's also the things that people will pay you to do, so it's striking a balance as far as that goes. I certainly am still excited about doing some more design for icons. I have a couple of sort of setting / game design concepts that I'm playing around with, that I'd like to do more with, but are really sideline projects that, when I'm not doing design for Green Ronin or for ad infinitum, they get the, sort of tertiary amount of my attention that I can devote to that. And I'd love to play around more with that. And I'd like to do, as has been pointed out, I have a superhero problem. I would like to do another superhero setting at some point. I don't know if it would be for Icons or for Mutants and Masterminds or for something else entirely, but it would be something I'd like to play around with. And one of my, sort of tertiary ideas is for something like that. So yeah, it's lots of little weird kind of personal pet projects for me in many ways at this point. There isn't like right now, there isn't a burning like, wow, I really wish I got to work on this property sort of a thing going on. So yeah, that sort of thing.
So kind of like a dovetail to that question, Kurt had asked the question actually prior. And I don't even know if this is in your consciousness, but like in the RPG niche, like you said, it's almost indie in and of itself. But at the top, you've got Wizards of the Coast, and you've got Paizo, and then right under that is like Green Ronin, Monte.
Right, you get the much smaller third tier, and then it just drops off.
Yeah.
Right,
so what I'm asking is, what are the difficulties of working in an RPG industry in light of the dominance of that?
Well,
does it even register? Like, I'm doing what I'm doing, and
yeah, I mean, it's the primary issue is, I guess it's primarily one of scale. When you're working below the first, below the top tier, which is Wizards and Paizo, basically. You're in a cottage industry, for all intents and purposes. Even the big third tier RPG companies are not that big. And we have to constantly clarify to people, the notion that we're not Wizards or Paizo. Companies have, if they're lucky if they have a staff at all, and if so, it's usually a small, group of people. So we're, mostly just dealing with the fact that our threshold of success is smaller in terms of, our sales and how a product does. But at the same time, that gives us a little bit more flexibility, in terms of what we can choose to do and how we can choose to do it. When you're a giant ship like Wizards of the Coast, you have to plan years in advance. Your deadlines are inviolable. You have a tremendous amount of work going on, and it's a big ship to steer. Smaller companies are more nimble, have more options, have more flexibility, and so those are all pretty good things, I think, for the most part.
Comic Book University had a really good one. Did you and your crew come up with the term omnipower of the Green Lantern's power ring in the DC Heroes game? That's the first time I remember seeing the term used, and he's pretty much a guru and aficionado on comic books. So,
yep. Well, omnipower was, actually one of Greg Gordon's. If he's referring to the omnipower from the original DC Heroes game that Mayfair put out, that was part of Greg's design. And omnipowers existed in different forms somewhat before that, but not too many. The infamous variable power pool from Champions was one of the first designs that I recall of that type. But omnipower was definitely a close follower, probably an early second generation version of that concept. And it's been one of the that kind of ability is one of the big challenges of superhero game design, is the level of flexibility that fictional superhero characters have, which is unfortunately that their powers are essentially whatever the writer thinks that they should be able to do that issue.
We have a series where we D&Di's fictional characters, and we do a lot of comic book characters, and we recently did like the Sword of omens, and we're like, well, this is kind of what it is, but if you really delve, it does whatever Lion-O needs it to do
it at any given time. Yeah.
So we've had you on for about an hour. We're gonna release you. But we really appreciate you coming, hanging out with us, answering questions.
My pleasure. Glad I could be here.
Like I said, Nerdarchy, all of Nerdarchy has played your games to some extent or another, and we're definitely fans. And I'm a little sad that I didn't realize how prolific you actually were and how many things you had your hands in. So I'll be keeping my eyes open in the future.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Folks can keep track of me at stevekenson.com and on social media and all of that sort of thing. And I'm happy I could join you guys.
Oh yeah, and that link is in the description. I should have said that earlier.
Awesome.
But yeah, thanks again, and everybody out there. Until next time, stay nerdy.